Hey everybody, welcome to Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. Happy weekend. Saturday morning. I'm getting a later start than normal because, well, I guess because I can. We're going to tackle something today that I can't hardly go 5 minutes without getting a question on. And that is the oiler on a Super 2, XL2, XL. I'll throw some pictures in here of the models I'm explicitly talking about. A little backstory. Actually, there's a lot of backstory. Because I'm going to try and do a lot with this video, and I may use the footage in multiple videos to try and cover a couple different topics. Number one, hose routing is massively important in these things. Super important to get the hose routing right. Otherwise, it's not going to work at all.
Can you see the bunny pen?
Yes, it looks good.
Thank you.
Nah, you show off. Get out of here. I'm telling you, they know. They can hear that little beep in the house. Camera, click. What? Anyway. Hose routing is so massively important in these, and it's so easy to screw up if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. And I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten. Hey, my Super 2 is running great, but it's just fogging mosquitoes like crazy, blowing oil smoke. Hoses are backwards. Or, potentially, duckbill is off. Okay, we're going to go through all of that sort of stuff. But there are two main systems that were used in these. The XL2s and the Super 2s all had a diaphragm oiler. Okay, that little guy right there. And that is actuated an engine pulse. It's an internal passage. Moves that thing back and forth. What it ends up doing is pressurizing the oil tank. Okay, that's why it's important to have an oil cap with a good gasket. Now, a good gasket can be compressed, like that one. Doesn't matter, as long as it's sealing. I mean, it's like anything. If you leave it in place, it's going to kind of conform in shape. But that's a cork gasket. Unless it's chunking, or you see some reason that you really think it's, not sealing, it probably is. But you need that. Pressurizes the tank. Now, it's probably only a couple PSI. But, excuse me, that is enough to start moving some oil to that chain. So, the other system uses pure crankcase pressure. It's just a separate port that is added to the engine, and it goes directly to the oil tank. You still use a duckbill valve, but there's no pump action. There's no variance with the speed of the engine. You just have, crankcase pressure going to the tank. Those systems tended to over-oil a little bit, and they also tended to leak a lot. This thing, when I turn it off, because it has a diaphragm oiler, I don't get oil underneath it, or at least very, very little. One of the XLs with the crankcase pressure system, some of those things will leak the entire tank out. And that's why it's important to set things up on your pressure line appropriately. And there's some minor adjustments to oil flow that you can do with that. So we'll go through all that today. The first thing I need to do is clean this saw up a little bit. I haven't had it apart probably since the end of last season. So I like to do that, especially with this little saw, about once a season. Really clean it up good. Get all the sawdust, the gunk, junk out of there. Keep the airflow good, because this is a go-to saw for me. I use it all the stinking time. If the firewood is under 10 inches or at 10 inches, I'm going to use this. Doesn't use as much fuel. It's a hell of a lot easier on my back. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. One-hand operation if you need to. Suppose if you're production cutting, maybe a bigger saw is better for you. Like I say, I like to have a lot of tools in my arsenal, and I use this one a lot. So I'm going to get this cleaned up, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the other thing that we're going to do. You know, no, we'll talk about it right now before I clean it up. These diaphragms have been made of unobtainium for quite some time, and the ones that are out there have gotten god-awful expensive. My last video, I'm pretty sure I had a screenshot of some eBay stuff that would be enough to just turn your stomach. Okay, we might have a solution here. Gentleman's already got them on eBay. This is a reproduction diaphragm. Now, it's not a complete assembly. It's got do-it-yourself instructions where you're basically peening out the rivet that's in here and taking the old diaphragm off and putting the new one on. That's what he's selling, is this diaphragm material that's got the cutouts in it, and then basically the instructions are on eBay. Now, the sample that he sent to me had already been done, so I haven't tried taking one apart. I don't have one to take apart that isn't new, and I'm not going to do that. So, but what I can tell you is the initial impressions look promising. I would say that some adhesive has been used to kind of hold everything in place. But I don't see, I mean, this isn't a high stress part. I don't see how there's going to be a problem with this, but he wanted me to test it. I'm going to. And as I'm explaining the oil system in this saw, we're going to be installing it on this saw that I use. And we're coming into fall. I'm going to be using it. I'm going to find out if this holds up. So I'll get this cleaned up and we'll come back. Okay. So this is not an assembly and disassembly video of the entire saw. I've got other ones there. Obviously, I've already got it torn apart. Doesn't take long. Yeah, check out those other videos. I have, what the hell are they calling them now? Playlists, I think. And I have a Super 2 XL playlist. They're in there. If I can remember, I'll try to put a couple of the real best ones in the description of this video. But here you go. Right now, let's get through the hose situation. So I'm going to back this off just a little bit. Okay. So, I want to correct one thing that I said, or I should add to. You see the depth. This oil plunger sits right under here. And you see the depth that this goes in. So it's doing two things. It's pressurizing the tank that forces oil up here, but then this plunger also is pumping. There is a check valve down in there. So that it is also, it's not just pressurized oil, it's pumped oil. So as it goes to the bottom of the stroke, it is pumping it out. I think that's part of why I like this system better. It's a little more controlled. At least that's how I'm going to say it. I'm going to take the carburetor off so we have a better view of what we're doing. Just keep it out of the way for now. Alright. So I'll turn this around. Everything's in frame. Now, not a lot, but some guys have commented on my hose kits that I sell. Hey, how come you don't include that discharge hose? I can count on one hand with fingers left over how many times I've needed to replace that. You just don't need to. That's original from whenever this saw was made, 82, 83, I don't remember now, but that's an original hose. That is subjected to just bar oil, so unless it's been damaged by something, there's no reason to replace it. That's why I don't include it. It doesn't harden, doesn't crack, just there. So you've got your oil pump right over here. Alright. You guys see how the hoses are routed right here. Take a look in the tank. This hose is your pressure hose. This is the one that should have the centered tube and the duckbill valve. Okay. That sintered tube very often is at the bottom of the tank. One of those videos I'm talking about shows me attempting to find it. In that particular video, I didn't. But so often, the original hose up here that was used, it was very thin wall. So eventually, this would fall out into the bottom of the tank and get stuck in the sludge. Now sometimes you've got to really get brutal in terms of put gas, drain all the bar oil, put gasoline in there and shake the ever-living piss out of it. Being careful, of course. You don't want to fling gas all over yourself, but you got to get that dissolved and then really tap the tank on the bench, and then all of a sudden one of these will come out with a black puddle of goo on it. Well, that puddle of goo is what's left of the old black duckbill valve. Okay, they came in black for a long time. So those are critical. Without that in place right there, let's say the tube is there, the duckbill's gone. You fill up the tank with oil. This is now going to suck oil back into the engine. On this style, it's not as bad because you've got a degree of separation, but it will do it. It will also cause erratic tuning. Okay? If your oil cap leaks, you're going to be sucking air into the engine that's not going through the carburetor. It'll be an air leak. Okay, I've done this when I'm testing oilers, just doing with the saw running, no oil cap on, tune it with the cap on, take the cap off with no duckbill in there, and the engine speed comes up. I'm telling you, this stuff is real. Okay, so this other one is nothing but the pickup hose. Goes to the bottom of the tank, has a filter on it. I should have grabbed this stuff, the props, before getting started on the video, but you guys have been with me long enough, I don't prepare like that. It's just one of these filters. Okay? Very, very simple. Very simple system that this thing uses. So, yeah, no joke, that's it. But you've got to be damned certain on the diaphragm oiler, this top hose goes over here. Duckbill valve hose goes to the oil pump. Oil pickup hose with the filter goes to the port right there. No, it doesn't get any more complicated than that. And I can't tell you how many times I've opened up a saw and found these reversed. Because it's almost in just the way it's laid out, the way everything lines up, it's almost intuitive to reverse them. But it will cause you to build a smoke machine. Because think about, if you reverse those, it is now got a wide open port of oil just coming back in here into the engine. The crankcase pressure models are even worse. So let's talk about that real quick. I've got another video up that shows that. It's the one where I'm looking for this tube, that centered tube. The big difference is you're going to have a port over here. Another one of these that's over here. Okay, and that's just ported right into the crankcase. So this hose would be attached there. This one's still going to be basically in the same rough location. Okay, I had to do a correction on this. I completely muffed the description that I had recorded on the main video of the crankcase pressure oiler. There's only one barb, and it does move locations. But the real important detail is that hose on the bottom of the oil tank that has the filter comes out and it goes all the way over to the bar pad. There's no other stop for it. It's direct from tank to bar pad. So the picture in that I put in. This is just a screenshot of that other video. It was never super clear, but I kind of tried to draw around it, and hopefully it gets the idea across with any luck. You don't have the secondary pumping. You just have pure crankcase pressure going into that tank. So we back this off a little bit, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the diaphragm assembly out, and because I don't want to make a giant mess all over my bench, we'll disconnect this oil pump. I know I'm harping on some things here, but I really want folks to get this right. I want to take the mystery out of this. Okay. So you can get this cover off just barely without pulling your clutch drum. You can. For our ease of work today, I will take it off. Now, if you've got the old style, where there's a C-clip there that hasn't been converted to a true snap ring, I'd probably just fuss and work around it. Okay, and that gives us plenty of room. So you got the 3 screws there. That's all it holds it on. I think I'm going to go that level of mag and hope it works well enough for you guys. Because then if I shift a little bit, I don't have to worry about the whole bloody thing going out of frame. So what we're going to do here, I'm showing you guys how this is all assembled and how it goes together, but I'm going to install that test diaphragm that I received and run it. And I will save this one as a spare part in my own collection of stuff. Like I say, I love these little saws. I know there's a lot of stuff online about just using a longer bar saw and, you know, everything from exaggerated kickback stories and all that, and you know, it comes down to personal preference. I like having multiple sizes of saws to use. Alright, so as you're taking one of these apart, you want to be real careful. I would say I tore that gasket previously at some point servicing this saw, and I chose to run it anyway because it's on the outside and it didn't matter. But if this inner gasket tears, then you got to take the time to replace it. Now there's a lot of, or there are more options now for those gaskets than just new old stock. There's a number of guys who are cutting them, including a gentleman who follows this channel that I bought a nice little batch from. And they work great. He did a phenomenal job of cutting them, and I will continue to use him as the supplier, you know, when I don't have OEMs, because you honestly can't tell the difference. They are good quality gaskets. And he's also looking at doing repairs like this. So he's asked me to save any bad ones that I get, which I, in a heartbeat, will. But I did warn him, I don't replace a lot of these. I would say this is probably the most misdiagnosed part of the oiling system. If your oiler isn't working, this diaphragm is going to be probably the last thing that I go after. All this other stuff, hoses, duckbill valve, proper pickup, far and away are the likely culprits. The diaphragms go bad. There's a reason they were sold, but it's very misdiagnosed. Very. Alright. Oh, shoot. Okay, right there. Now we're not as good a view as we're going to get. So, right there, that hole is your port down into the crankcase. So when you're, the way this is set up, when you're putting your silicone on the crankcase halves, And I think this opens up just below the flange on this side. So right into the crankcase, right in there. So you've got a good solid action. Okay, we have the spring here that goes against the cover. That's what provides the rebound. So the crankcase pulse is going to push it out, and that's going to push it back in. Boom. So you are getting a pump action. And I'm trying to be somewhat gentle with this. This sawdust shield likes to get in the way. And I actually have that reversed. Dummy. I mean, these things aren't fragile, but... So yeah, it's going to sit there and just in and out. That's what it does. That's all this system is. So, take a look at this. There's a gasket on both sides of the diaphragm. Alright? Some of the early installations showed it just on the inside. Truly, I don't think it matters. I truly don't think it matters. I install it on both sides because if I have to take this cover off, I'm going to likely tear the gasket and not the diaphragm itself. You know what I mean? That's what I'm showing you here. See, that gasket tore. If this cover had stuck to the diaphragm, it could have torn that. So that might be the most compelling reason. So the pump cylinder that's in here has a check valve at the bottom. It's just a little ball. I've never had to pull one of these. The early assembly IPLs show this as a removable piece, and it is. But I don't know that you can get it out without destroying it, so you better make damn certain you've got one of those cylinders on hand before you start trying to pull that out of there. I think there's a retaining ring. I don't think it's a press fit, but I honestly don't know. Like I said, I've never had to pull one. And I'd be shocked if you did. Okay? I don't know why I can't remember that button. So if for some reason you think that check valve is bad, you know what I would do? Get out your compressed air and give it a quick burst and see if you get oil or air out at the bar pad. And if you think it's sticky, blow a little carb cleaner, some brake cleaner, something like that through it. I mean, carefully. Again, don't spray yourself in the face, but I would pull that at an absolute last resort. Now, sure, it lines up with this discharge port. You know, it's possible that you could access something by pulling this and then tapping that, but we're not doing that. I don't want to deal with it. Just throwing out possible ideas for you guys. But we're going to stick to basics here. And we're going to install that new diaphragm with a couple new gaskets. And these, at least one of them, are gaskets that were cut by the gentleman I'm referring to. So yes, I will absolutely use the stuff I talk about. And since we've got some of the cover torn on this one, or some of the gasket that goes to that, I'm going to use a different cover. So that when I do switch back to that diaphragm someday, I can still reuse that. Save a few bucks. So the early versions of these gaskets didn't have these outside holes. Those were added when it was used on the 450 and 550 chainsaws. So if you didn't know that, automatic oiler on them, same little critter right here. So, gasket on one side, gasket on the other side. Slip that in place. I really do hope this video will take some of the mystery out of how these things work. And I'll chapter it as well, so that if you don't want to listen to my babbling in one section, you can kind of slip around to the other and find what it is you're looking for. Okay. Now, what the hell do we have going here? Okay. Alright. Okay. I would say that the diaphragm slipped just a smidge in terms of being centered on the shaft there. So that will be something, if you choose to do a kit, you know, like this, you got to watch out for. And it's going to make getting this cover on just a little bit more difficult. Small side of the spring against the diaphragm, big side against the cover. And this is actually, god dang, a lot easier when the gaskets are used and kind of adhered to the diaphragm already. Okay. So the reason I say that something slipped a little bit is the opening was just about a 30-second off on the diaphragm on this upper corner. So I'm going to be carefully trying to start it without wrinkling and damaging something. But like most things, you want to get all 3 screws started before you start reefing down. And whatever you do, don't cross-thread this. Okay. Now these don't have to be reefed real tight. Just good and snug. That's it. That is an oil pump diaphragm. So, let's talk about a few more things before we put this thing back. Whoop, god dang it, I wish I wouldn't do that all the time. Before we put it all the way back together, we'll go ahead and throw the clutch back on, just so that I can get it the hell out of my way. Okay. That is normal. That is normal. That is absolutely normal. The bearing is built into there. There is no race. They left tolerance back and forth and side to side so that variances in bars and chains would allow it to align. You're not going to damage your saw running it like that. This sprocket only has about, I don't know, 20 hours on it. It's fine. It's not a problem. If you're really concerned, you could throw some grease in there before you put it on. I know with this automatic oiling system, that oils up just fine. Alright, I'm going to grab a piece of hose, and we're going to go through setting the proper depth on your centered tube and your duckbill and all that. So remember I was talking about the XLs. Alright, now this is just going to be... there's so much. It's really hard to put it in one video. We'll start with this. Applies to all of them. So get it in there about a little over halfway. Now this is easier to do when it's outside of the saw, but in the tank there's plenty of room to work. Pull your hose in this way and up through the neck and do your work, and then pull it back. I'm not going to re-hose that tank because I don't need to. But start it right about there, alright? So that when your duckbill is fully installed, okay, and that's it. See how there's a gap there? You want that. So this tube being centered like this really means it's got tiny little air passages in it. So what is that going to do when you don't have a great seal there? Well, it's going to adjust your oil flow rate a little bit. A little bit, because this allows pressure to relieve. More importantly, when you turn the saw off, that gap allows the pressure to bleed back through into the crankcase and, in theory, stop your saw from sitting there and making a giant puddle of oil. So you want a minimum of 1/16 of inch reveal between the duckbill and the hose. I find an 1/8 of an inch works beautiful. That's what I've got in here. That's what I've been running for years. And that positioning too. You want to pull that hose back out just enough that the duckbill is not jammed against, the tip of it isn't jammed against the wall of the tank. Okay? Because that can alter it, it can distort it and make it so it doesn't seal. Doesn't matter if the main body is sitting against the tank, but not the tip. So that's it. There is no more science to it than that. So this thing means you can blow, and it pushes air through, but boy, not much comes the other way. Just what can go through that tube, which isn't much, but it's enough, like I say, to alter how much oil is delivered a little bit. We're not talking a lot, just a little, but it really does help prevent making a mess when the thing is turned off. Especially when it's still hot, because heat builds pressure. So if that tank pressurizes because it's hot, it's not running, and that has nowhere to go, it's going to sit there and pump oil out. It's going to take the path of least resistance. Air back through this line is less resistance than what it takes to push the oil out. So if you do this, this helps. Alright, now on the XLs that have the crankcase pressure, okay, there is a little restrictor. I will put a picture in the video right here. What you do with that is you put it right in the top of a factory style filter, and it takes that neck down to about 1/3 of that size, and then you install your hose right over the top of it. And that is also on XL crankcase pressure systems, designed to stop it from over oiling and help prevent the mess that it can leave behind, because it makes it harder to push oil out. That path of least resistance we were talking about, it will let pressure bleed back through into the engine. Now, I can tell you for a fact, it's not perfect. There's a reason why they didn't stick with that system for very damn long. If you have one of those saws and you've done everything I've talked about, and it still does that, about the only other chance in hell that you have of not making a mess, when you turn off your saw, loosen the oil cap. When you store it away in your garage, do that. Now that comes with a risk, because if you forget that you did that, and it falls off the shelf, or you pick it up and slog oil everywhere, well, that sucks, but it's about the only other way I know of. So, I guess let's go to a troubleshooting section before I put this back together and we give it a test run. It's not oiling. Got it running good, it's not oiling. Where do you start? Okay. You've pulled your saw apart, you've got a mess sitting here like this. You haven't done anything else other than clean it up. Very first thing, or you don't even have to pull it apart, but look in the tank. Is there a duckbill there? No. Need a duckbill. Is the cintered tube there? No. Well, that's a problem. That's the most common thing I see. That upper hose has nothing in the end of it. So what am I going to do at that point? I'm going to empty this tank of oil carefully, looking for something coming out of it. I'll save the oil if it's good. And you can use a coffee filter. Just carefully pour the oil out. Look for that tube in the bottom of the tank covered in black goo. Use some gasoline in there if you have to. I mean, I don't think I have. Let me see if I've got a tank laying around. Oh, sure. Oh, there we go. When I say put some fuel in there and shake it around, I mean shake it around. You get a little fuel in there. Dump your fuel into whatever receptacle. See, this one's still in place. But if it wasn't, what I just did, if it was in the bottom of the tank, it would come out. So don't be afraid to, do some stuff. Now, I'm not walloping the hell out of that. I'm not being dumb about it. But you don't have to pretend that it's made of glass. Because those tubes are not easy to find. And they're expensive when you do. So the alternative, there is a later model Homelite part that was sold that has, it's used on the late plastic versions of these things. It's a T connector, all right? But it's plastic. So instead of having a, bunch of tiny little micro holes, they filled one end with the rubber and just left a tiny little hole in the tip. And that's the bleed off. These are a little easier to find. You can find those on eBay. I might even still have one or two in stock. I don't remember. So that's one option, assuming that Cintered tube is gone. Other option is go down to your local hardware store or even Home Depot and just buy a plastic connector block that's the right size, and then using the smallest drill bit you can find, you could drill a hole just past where the hose goes. And I've never tried it. I haven't had to do this yet, but the other thought I've really have had is you could take a sewing needle, probably, and if you put you could put enough electrical tape on it to chuck it up in a drill, and that would be about the right size hole. The other thing is drill the hole that you can drill and use some Moto Seal around it and put a needle in there so that it leaves a little opening. Just something. You got to have something that allows that pressure to bleed back, but you don't want it to be too big. So let me put this junk away. So again, we're troubleshooting, I would say 80% of people's problems are probably right here in the tank. Now, if that tube has fallen out, odds are good that hose is trash because it's gotten soft and it let it fall out, okay? Just replace it. If you're going to all this trouble and you've got it apart, get the right hose and replace it. I sell the kits. It's easy to do. So take care of it. When you're hooking it back up, now see, my lines are formed, so it's going to be real easy for me. But I know that the lower hose is my oil pickup with the filter. So I want it going where it's going to supply oil to the pump. I know that the upper hose has the duckbill, and I know that I want it over here by the diaphragm where that engine pulse can actuate it. So that's what it should look like. Top hose over here. Bottom hose over here. If you've got the XL crankcase pressure, this is going to be over here. Another port right there. So you've done all that. Or you say you found all that in place and it just isn't oiling. What are you going to do? Well, at that point, it's worth pulling this cover carefully and inspecting that diaphragm. Now, there are two different versions of the diaphragm that Homelite produced, two very distinct differences. One was a thinner material like this, and the other was about twice that thick. So that one doesn't move as easily. But as long as it moves, don't replace it. If it's not crunchy, it's working. Okay? It's working. Make sure the spring is on the outside. That's pretty critical. That's it. It's going to be one or the other. And over here is where I'm going to bet every time. Now, if you suspect you have an oil delivery problem, it's not pumping oil, you guys have seen me do it on the channel before, those of you who've been around. I always test it before I ever even take it apart. Take the bar off, have the saw running, and put a dab of oil right there and give it a couple revs. If you get air bubbles, the pump is trying to work. Now you might still get some air bubbles, you know, without the duckbill in place there. So you're still going to have to diagnose that. But if you can get some air bubbles there, then whatever your pump action is working. So, I have no idea how long this is getting. Probably longer than I intended, because it's always the way it happens. I'm going to put this saw back together, and we're going to come back for a test run. And if we can get some oil to sling off... Actually, you know what? I'll leave the bar off, and I'll demonstrate that test procedure. And we'll see if this repaired diaphragm will pump some oil for us. Okay, I know I said I was going to turn the saw on its side and see if we could do the bubble test, but the way it's tucked up in here, trying to get that on video would be next to impossible. So I think we're just going to run it and see how long it takes this thing to prime and start puking some oil on the bench. Okay, it's working just fine. I don't want to run it much more than that because the way this is designed, it's just going to run down into the engine case here and make a mess, start creating a disaster again. So, yeah, this was kind of a multi-purpose video. I'm now going to run that diaphragm, repaired diaphragm, and just see how it does this fall. And in terms of the troubleshooting and how the oil system works on these, I hope that really helps take some of the mystery out of it. Yeah, hopefully it makes it easier for you guys when you're working on these saws.